Okay, so hey everyone, thank you again for joining me to check out the Meet the Maker interview series for the Bristol and Bloom Appalachian Regional Art Festival. My name's Marcy. I am now talking to Summer Duncan of Beauty Markings. Summer is a local tattoo artist, super talented. You'll pretty much see her tattoos everywhere you go. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me, Summer, and for agreeing to do this interview with me, and also for participating in the Bristol and Bloom Art Festival.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Cool. So why don't you just go ahead and sort of introduce yourself, just let people know where they can find you, where you're from, that sort of thing.
Okay. I was born in Glade Spring, Virginia, which nobody knows about unless they're from here. And, and I've lived in Johnson City, Tennessee since I was 2. I have a little private studio in downtown Johnson City. And then I share my art also through Etsy, and pretty much everything is on Instagram, which is also Beauty Markings.
Yeah. So really quickly, I'm just going to share my screen so people can see some of the work that you have available. I know you just said you share your work on Etsy. So can you see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I've got your Etsy shop pulled up here. And as someone who now owns 2 of your prints, I love them so much.
Thank you.
I actually just got them framed and hung up in my bedroom, and they are so gorgeous. What I love so much about your illustrations here are like they just have this delicate quality and this grace.
Thank
Even
you.
Yes, even with, some of the subject matter being more macabre or um um I don't want to say dramatic, but there's just this delicateness to them, even with things that might otherwise be a little more I guess I would say morbid, but not even necessarily that. Um
Well, I appreciate that because I guess that's ultimately what I aim for, is finding beauty everywhere. We'll put it that way.
yeah, well, they really are so beautiful, and for me, that's what attracted me to a lot of your prints and your illustrations. And then I'm going over here now to your tattoos. So these are some examples of tattoos. This is your website. You know that. For
Yeah.
anybody watching, this is Summer's website. These are some tattoos that she's done. And also, being somebody that has one of your tattoos and hoping to get more in the future. What I also love is the line work and the stippling details that you do with the dots, and especially all the botanical themes. Ooh, I love this Medusa one I just noticed.
Yeah. Lots of mythology influences for sure.
Yeah. So with that, and this is your Instagram, so Beauty Markings is where you can find her. I see you're in your beautiful studio space, which I love.
Thanks.
Yeah, and so you can see some more tattoos, some other offerings that you have with the tarot workshops, which we'll talk more about later. But yeah, just really beautiful work that you're doing that I love so much, and really appreciate. So I'm wondering, would you mind sharing for people who don't know just where you got started? Like, have you always been an artist? Have you always drawn? Did you go to school?
Yeah. I don't remember not drawing. And thankfully my parents always really encouraged it. They saved a lot of my stuff, and they never told me that I couldn't be an artist, which is nice, because I don't feel like a lot of parents do that. But they were very realistic about it. They're like, you can be an artist, but it's going to be really hard and you're going to have to work really hard. So, yeah, I've always created things, but I didn't really get serious about tattooing until I was 20. I'd always wanted to do it, and I had been to college for fine art. Um, And I appreciated my time in college, but I also realized after 3 years that for my particular, for art in particular, I don't feel like you have to have a degree, because art is very subjective. And I got tired of paying a lot of money for a piece of paper that said I was a real artist. So I finished my third year there and then decided, like, okay, I think I can just figure this out on my own. Had my son and realized that if I wanted to tattoo, I needed to make it happen sooner rather than later. Finally got an apprenticeship when I was 23, tattooing, but I've always made art, um, at the, throughout my life. But tattooing, I guess, became a more of like the job side of art, but in a very good way. Worked in several shops and then opened my own when I was 27, I believe, 26, 27. And I've just had a private studio since then.
So I see that you're at your studio now.
Yeah.
And your studio is so gorgeous. So I feel like people just need to see it. But so no pressure, but would you mind just like showing us a little bit of your studio space?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much like I have the pretty end of things and then my actual workspace for tattoos is in the corner, but I collect a lot of antiques and candle holders and old furniture.
Beautiful thing.
So it's definitely very feminine. And I also have a lot of plants. Um, yeah, I'm here all the time, so I like to feel at home here for sure.
Yeah. Well, I just know for me, I have some brothers that are tattoo artists as well. And I appreciate the setting of your studio so much because, you just don't see that often, I feel like, or you don't get that experience often. So me being a woman, I feel so comfortable in your space, not only because you're a woman, but also because it's just so beautiful. And you do really put that effort into making it a comfortable and inviting space. And it doesn't feel like, I feel like sometimes in tattoo artists or tattoo studios, it can seem very like sterile, like,
Yeah, like very kind of cold
yeah, like
or
medical space almost.
yeah, I think, you can be very clean without being cold.
Yeah.
And I like people to be comfortable. And I think that part of that comes from my experience of getting tattooed when I was younger. And I never had a bad experience, but I noticed the environments were all very similar and very medical, but also very boys club,
Yeah.
um, which is fine, but like that's not my thing. So I wanted to create a space that was warm and welcoming and very quiet and calm because I feel like that you need to be as relaxed as possible when somebody is stabbing you with a needle.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So something else that I wanted to ask, oh, and just going off of what you said earlier, that I really appreciate what you were talking about, not needing a piece of paper in order to feel like an artist and in order to be an artist.
Mhm.
I just think that's something that's really valuable, especially what I find for Appalachian artists is
Mhm.
because it seems like a lot of Appalachian artists, and not all Appalachian artists, but a lot of them are sort of like DIYing it or, teaching themselves in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
So I just really appreciate you saying that as well.
Well, I think that's very also just indicative of like Appalachian culture in general and being very self reliant. And I appreciate education tremendously, but because art in particular is so subjective and personal, I don't, I think I definitely learned some techniques in school, but I wouldn't say that I learned like my style. I didn't, like it was just, um, yeah, it was mostly just technique based. And I try to encourage people that I meet who are, I guess, like up and coming or just, feel kind of shy about their work or insecure because they don't have a degree. It's like you don't of course, if you're going to be like a doctor, yes, but to make art, you can just do that, and the right people will find you, I think.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think it's a lot just that practice of like making art. That's where
Yeah.
you gain the most education.
Yeah, trial and error for sure. And I think too, part of our culture is very like goal oriented, which sometimes is very antithetical to creating art, because at least for me, like art should be your own first and foremost, and you make it to process something of yourself. And then if other people enjoy it, that's great. But ultimately, like it's just so personal. So I don't think that, I think our culture wants us to think that we need certain external validation of what we do. But with art, you should just create it.
Yes, yes. And I think a lot of people will appreciate hearing that as well, because I've also gotten a lot of feedback from, there are several, with the art festival in particular, there have been people of all different ranges as far as like skill levels and practitioners, I guess you could even say, that have applied and are participating in the event. So we have people who are identify as hobbyists that say that have said anyway that it's not something that they have the education behind, and so they're not really certain of their work. And so I think it'll help them to hear that as well, that you don't need that, like you said, that external validation in order to be an artist or to be making art. It's as much you know it's less about the finished product as much as it is, and more so about like the process of getting there, and that that practice.
Yeah,
um,
for sure.
yeah. So you've got prints available for people to purchase at your Etsy shop, and I'm going to include links to all of your Etsy shop, your website, your social media platforms, and everything for people to have access to. But otherwise, people can find that information in your Instagram bio
Yes.
and on your website.
Yeah.
So you've got prints that are available for sale, and then you've also got your tattoos. So as far as, say I'm a person who wants to come to you to get a tattoo, can you walk me through like what that process would look like as far as booking it, and then the process of like getting the tattoo, drawing it up, all of that, and just so people can know what that's like?
Yeah. Well, so I made an FAQ section on my website for that because it's kind of lengthy. But essentially, I open my books once a month, usually at the first of the month. And then I do everything through email. So people email me with their idea, and then some dates that would work for their schedule. I get back in touch with them and let them know if it's something that I feel comfortable doing. And then they send a deposit through Venmo. We set the date, and then I usually send the drawing about a week ahead of the appointment. And they come in, and it's a private studio, so that's my only client at the time. I don't have people in and out all day. We don't get interruptions, so it's a pretty calm, intimate experience.
Yeah, that's super, really comforting and nice. Again, especially like I said, for me as a woman going into a tattoo shop to get to be tattooed, it's just nice to have that intimacy
Yeah.
in that setting, and that attention too, because like you said, not having those distractions of people coming in and those interruptions.
I'm not a multitasker, so at all. So yeah, it helps my process too to just be able to give my full attention to that client.
Right. So I know right now, because of the COVID pandemic and everything that's going on, right now you're sort of limited in terms of your bookings and tattoos.
Mhm.
Um, and it's hard to say like when things are going to be okay again.
Yeah.
Um, so aside from that, you are also offering astrological chart readings, natal chart readings for people.
Yeah.
So I did want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
As somebody who's gotten a chart reading from you, I can just say that it was so insightful. If you're not familiar with astrology, when you're going to get a chart reading, your natal chart is like the blueprint of the cosmological influences that are in your life at that time of your birth. And so those cosmological influences will play different roles throughout your lifetime based on where they were in your chart. Would you say that's a pretty...
Yeah, that's a good way of describing it. I tell people, like, your natal chart, like, this is the hand you were dealt.
Yes.
This is what you came here with.
Yes. So a lot of people are familiar with their sun signs, but there's your natal chart pretty much lays out so much more
Yes.
and
Very,
gives a more complete, a more complete picture. So as somebody who's had a chart reading with you, I can say that it really helped for me to gain clarity in a lot of specifically things that I struggle with and how to navigate those areas of challenge for me a little bit better, especially as somebody who's going through their Saturn return currently.
yeah.
Yes. That was really helpful. So with your, well, let's just talk a little bit about like, how long have you been studying astrology and how that sort of came into the picture?
Well, I that's another thing that feels very lifelong. Like, I used to read my horoscope in the newspaper, which really shows my age. Back when we read the newspaper, I used to read it. I think it was like with the cartoons in the newspaper. So
Mhm.
that's how I found it. And I think I was like 6 and would always check my horoscope. And I just thought it was fun and interesting. And then in my teens, of course, this is like pre Google, found some books at the library. And it was very like you really had to dig to find things. And then a couple years before my Saturn return, when I was 25, 24, 25, I started actually really like devouring knowledge and learning about my chart. And once I got comfortable with that, started reading for other people and tracking transits and how that lined up with like things that were happening in the external world. And it just makes a lot of sense for me and helps me navigate life for sure. And I can see in my clients, like it definitely helps you understand yourself in a very honest way.
Yes, that's the perfect way to describe it, in a very honest way.
Because
Um,
it's not all when you do something like a natal chart, it's very intimate and very it just lays everything out on the table. So it's not all good like you would maybe read in like a sun sign horoscope. It's more like, okay, here's your faults and here's your strengths.
yes, and it's very different even from very, very different from like I always think of Cosmo horoscopes, like
Oh
Cosmopolitan.
yeah.
Those sun signs horoscopes where it's like things are probably going to be a little challenging. You should just go ahead and buy the new shoes. And it's
Yeah.
just okay.
Yeah.
um
A tall dark stranger, very vague.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you can actually, or people can actually book the astrology chart readings, and they can do that through your shop or your
Um, email.
email. Okay.
So there's also an astrology tab on my website, on the beautymarkings.com website, that has sort of describing the different types of readings.
Yeah, let's see.
Um,
Astrology, here it is.
yeah, and then just again, I do everything through email, so people will just email me and let me know that they want a reading and what kind they want.
Yes. So you've got here the natal chart reading, the ongoing astrology consultations. So that could be for things more specific. If there's like a challenging transit that's coming up for their chart at the time, they could maybe book a reading with you.
Mm-hmm.
Or, for example, like Venus retrogrades coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So booking a reading even with you to consult about that. And then the relationship and compatibility chart readings. And that actually reminds me of something else. You also just got your Patreon started.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me see if I can even pull up the Patreon. So with your Patreon, there are different tiers that
Mhm.
people can choose to support you. Is that right?
Yeah, there's 3, and I tried to keep it pretty affordable. It started because I started a podcast during quarantine about astrology, which I always wanted to do, but never had time. Now I've had nothing but time. So I started that, and then actually, my partner has a Patreon and really encouraged me to. He's like, you're doing all this work. Why not? If people are that interested in learning, why not offer it, and then have some form of like monetization there. So I have $5 to $30, but the podcast is free for everybody. So the Patreon is just more educational. So like teaching people how to read their chart,
Yes.
like that.
Yeah. So it's funny. Brian just popped in on our
I
call
saw
for
that.
speaking of your partner. So yeah, his time slots 2:30. We're not there yet, but anyway, so with your Patreon, I was going to try and pull it up so that people could see that. But let's see. Do you happen to know if I were to search for your Patreon?
Yeah, it's patreon.com, and then it's actually under a different name because I didn't want to confuse people. So it's practical_magic, but with a K on the end.
And that's the name of your podcast also,
Yes.
for people who want to hear about astrological updates and different conversations around astrology.
Yeah.
So that might not be pulling up, but that's okay. So people know how to find it. But otherwise, so with that, you've got, so that's astrology, you've got your prints, you've got tattoos, and then in addition to that, you also offer tarot workshops on occasion.
Yeah. Yeah. I love tarot. I've done a couple workshops on it now. It's just a nice tool to have. I find that it kind of helps like either confirm your intuition or call you on your crap.
Yes.
So I use it sometimes when I just need a little bit of clarity, but don't necessarily want to have to pull up my own chart. And astrology helps with that too, but tarot is more intuitive than astrology. So I and it's kind of having a renaissance moment. So I like teaching other people. It's like, oh, here's this thing that you can learn how to use, and then it's just um, another tool to help.
Yeah, I find I use it a lot when it comes to journaling. Sometimes just drawing a card and then journaling based on whatever that was, whatever that sort of brings up. Like you said, it's a very intuitive process. But yeah, so do you have, I was going to say, do you have any plans to offer any tarot workshops anytime soon? But it's hard to know.
Yeah, I had one scheduled actually for this past weekend, but you can't gather yet. So I'm pushing it back a little bit, and if I'm just kind of waiting to see what happens. And if we do end up having to stay in longer, I'll probably just record it and then send a private link to the people that have already paid for that. But I am also going to probably start offering that on Patreon as well.
Oh, super cool. That's awesome. Well, okay, last question. Because I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I've also got your partner that's waiting and clearly eager to be on the call. So, as far as your influences, so with your art, I know you said earlier that there were a lot of mythological influences. And it sounds like even with astrology and tarot, there's some of that sort of interwoven in the things that you're offering. But you also do a lot of botanical
Mm-hmm.
illustrations and tattoos also. So what, I guess, what would you say is the main part of your inspiration? And then how do you integrate all of those things into your work?
Well, I think they all flow together really well, and it feels very natural. I mean, everything for me ties into nature in some sense, as does astrology, as does mythology. You know, all of these stories and concepts are centered around the natural world. And I think there's something very honest um, in that, as well as just like universal, like everybody can connect with that. And plants, especially, are just timeless and beautiful. Um, and I have Jupiter and Taurus in the fifth house, so of course I would do this.
That's so funny and awesome. Yeah, for sure. And I do agree with that about the honesty that is in nature and present in those things, because there's something that I think is um, somewhat problematic and becoming more common, is just this sort of toxic positivity where everything's like, everything's great, everything's beautiful, all love
Hmm.
and light. But at some point you have to acknowledge that there are, at some point you have to own and acknowledge that there are bad things, there are sad things, there's, not everything you do is good or great. You have to own those parts of yourself that are not so good. And I feel like nature and especially astrology serve as really good mirrors for um, not only showing those things or revealing those things, but how to do so with grace. And
That's the ideal goal.
yes, yes, right. Yes.
I think being able to hold the opposites is what I seek in my life, but also in my work. And that's probably why a lot of things are beautiful, but also kind of macabre. And so it's an interesting mix of feelings. And when people encounter my work visually, I see that sometimes where they're intrigued, but they're not sure if they're comfortable with it. But it's also very pretty, so it's a mixed bag, and I like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's actually a really great response, I think.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, that's pretty. Oh, wait, they really look at it, and it's like that makes me feel things that I'm not sure I want to feel. I'm like, well, that's what art is for. It's fine.
Yes, exactly. I would take that as a compliment. Cool. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, and I do, like I said, have your partner that is going to be coming up next. So, just want to thank you again so much for sharing this moment, for taking this time to share with me today, for sharing your story, and so much of your work and your process. And yeah, I just love what you're doing. I love your work. Keep it up, and thank you again for participating in the art festival. Also,
Yeah, thanks for organizing it all and bringing it all together. I'm
yeah,
excited.
cool. All right. Well, we will catch up again soon.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye.